Welcome to part 28 of our B44.2 RC buggy build, and we're going to attack this gigantic bag of parts. This is bag QQ, and this is going to be the front and rear shock build, and it has everything that we need to build out our shocks. And actually not exactly everything. We're missing like some of the shock building tools, and most importantly we're also missing green slime. And for whatever reason, this kit just doesn't include green slime. And I highly recommend getting some green slime. It's going to be helpful with rebuilding shocks and building out this kit. Here are our shock springs, or not shock springs, but our shock pistons. And even though they are labeled, I'm going through with a Sharpie and I'm just tapping it in so I could easily identify the shock pistons. And as you see, by just moving the Sharpie over it and just kind of marking it a little bit better, it makes identifying the shock pistons much easier. And some of you guys probably think like, well, I'm not going to do this, but if you're racing indoors, sometimes the indoor tracks don't have good lighting and in the pits, and it gets kind of hard to visually distinguish the different numbers in the shock pistons. So I'm just going to go ahead and just label those right now while I have time. And next I'm going to go ahead and just grab my shock piston shaft. There's going to be 4 shock piston shafts. 2 of them are going to be shorter. Those are going to be for the front. 2 of them are going to be longer. Those are going to be for the back. So let's go ahead and organize these parts a little bit better. It's just kind of amazing. We have a ton of parts. Here are our O-rings, and these are going to go on the shocks as well too. The smaller O-rings, the red ones, those are going to be a part of the shock shaft. So we're going to go ahead and take care of those too. Then we have our spacers. So we're going to just organize that a little bit better. Apologize, the camera's a little out of focus. Just so excited with all these parts. And we have more O-rings and more spacers. So let's go ahead and organize these a little bit better. And I really love my car RC pit map here, so I could actually use these foam corrals to get everything nicely organized. And I'm just going to go ahead and just dump them in there. So as you can see, you're going to need plenty of space when you're working with shocks. Alright, so let's break some of these pistons off these spruces. We're going to be using 1.6 shock pistons in the front and then 1.7 in the rear. So just exactly as the way it's denoted in the manual. And just so you're aware that there are some flashings on the shock piston, so I'm just going to take some scissors and just trim off the flashing just a little bit better. And I'm going to go ahead and grab the shock shaft here, and I'm going to go ahead and use an E-clip and just try to move that E-clip in place, and then place the shock piston right over there. So just some additional flashing, and I'm just going to just trim that a little bit and then just place it right on that piston there. Grab another E-clip, and this E-clip is actually going to go on top. So there's an E-clip below the shock piston, and then there's going to be a retainer E-clip that goes on top of that shock piston. And we just use the alligator clips to lock that into place. And I'm going to build out another one just to show this to you, the process again. And we just go ahead and move the E-clip into that shock piston place. We just push that in, and that's in there nice and solid. Then we put our shock piston on there, and then we put the retaining E-clip on top. There we are, and that locks into place just like that. So fairly simple. Then we have our Let's go ahead and thread in the nylon spacer. And now let me just zoom in, and we're ready to build out the main portion of the shock. So essentially the VCS3 shock bottom is going to just be composed of O-rings, nylon spacers, and I'm going to also hold these together with green slime. So I'm just going to thread up an O-ring up here before I forget. So it's always nice to remember to put your O-rings on there, and I like to just do them right away. Next, I'm going to just go ahead and grab a nylon spacer and O-ring here. I'm just going to go ahead and just thread these in, and I like to smear green slime all over these things. So, and I'm just kind of upset that the kit doesn't include any green slime, and it's not like green slime is super expensive. It's like $2 or $3. You can get green slime from any vendor. For example, like Team Associated makes green slime, Kyosho makes green slime, Losi makes green slime. They're all very good. It doesn't matter which brand you purchase. I highly just recommend you just getting some kind of green slime. And green slime is actually just grease that is just geared for shocks. So it's just manufactured just for that particular purpose. And I've seen racers not use green slime when they're building shocks as well too. And to each his own. I just think like this is my best advice to you is if you don't listen to anything else I'm telling you, do get green slime for your shocks. So I'm lubing up the O-ring, and then I'm placing in the nylon spacer. So the way this works is it's just nylon spacer, then O-ring, then nylon spacer, then O-ring. And then I highly recommend just lubing up whenever you're putting in the O-rings. You just lube them up with green slime. So we'll just go ahead and place in green slime there. Grab my nylon spacer and we'll put that in. And I do smear a little green slime on some of the nylon spacers just so that they hold in place a little bit better. Then I go ahead and thread in the shock hat brushing. And that is how that bottom part of the shock is held in place. So that was for the front. Rear is going to be exactly the same way, and I'll do this one time through. So I'll just show you just nylon spacer, then green slime and plus O-ring, and essentially it's not any different than say the front shock. So rear shock and front shock, that progression of green slime and O-rings, those layers are the same. It's just that the rear shock is going to be longer. So essentially just take your time, and you know, like if you don't have any green slime, I highly recommend just once again just going to your local hobby shop, seeing if they have any. If they don't, you could always order some online. And if you're not a firm believer in it, it's only just $2 or $3, and it's just kind of easy to try out. It would be, I wouldn't recommend it if it was like, say, like $16 for green slime or something like that, some horrible number. But it's you know, it's not out of the budget in affordability. The only baffling thing is it's strange that we have black grease, and then we have like diff grease, and we have shock fluid, but we don't have green slime with this kit. So it's kind of interesting that even though we have a lot of other fluids that are included with the kit, green slime is not included. I'm just going to go ahead and lube the shock shaft here with green slime, just make sure that everything is moving okay. And I'm just checking the shock shaft to make sure that things are flowing. There we are. And I'm going to go ahead and thread the shock cap on here. Just go ahead and thread that through the eyelet and just put that in there. They do actually have specific shock tools. There's a couple of special shock tools. There's a soft jaws tool that I'm thinking I might purchase. The one I'm looking at is actually back ordered at A-Main. So maybe for my next order, I might place in a tool for shock building. If you don't have soft jaws, you could do like what I did. You could take from one of the bags and then curl it over the shock shaft. We do have some springs with this kit. These are just the default springs, nothing super special. One easy thing to forget is to put the O-rings on the shock collars there, and that is just so easy to forget. Like sometimes you finish building out an entire shock and then you have an O-ring just kind of staring at you, and you're like, where did this come from? So I'm just going ahead and just thread this in, and this is very tricky to actually thread in. The O-ring just constantly wants to pop out. So for these particular O-rings, I would say it's almost easier not to use green slime to slime this. For these ones, it's easier just to leave the green slime out and then thread it up to the shock collar. And I have these filled with fluid, so I'm just doing this slight push and just pushing up the fluid to make sure that this is working okay. And it's going to top off with the rest of the fluid. They actually do sell like some special shock building shelves. I heard that they don't necessarily work great with some big bore shocks, but I'm telling you, it's got to work better than my paper cup, my plastic cup with paper towel version of the shock towers here. So I might purchase some of that. I'm just topping off the top cap here as I'm putting that in. There we go. And shock building is messy because you get shock fluid just everywhere. And I'm just topping this off with like just 35 weight shock fluid, and I'm pushing that all the way in. I should have probably pushed that in slower. I'm just because I'm recording this, I'm working a little faster than normal. I'm just topping this off with green slime here, for that O-ring, and then I'm going to go ahead and push the O-ring into that thread, into that shock cap, so we can plug this from leaking. And I'm just going to go ahead and just twist that in. There we are. And everything is very messy. My pit mat has shock fluid, my hands, fingers, everything has shock fluid at this point. And that is totally normal. It just comes with the territory of building shocks. And I'm not liking the action on this one. I may have just pushed it a little too quick, but I'm just going to go ahead and just pump it a little bit and just checking it out. It seems to, there we are. It seems to get a little better now. So I'll just continue to screw this in, making sure that it's nice and tight. And now you just have to do this 3 more times and you would have all their shocks topped off. Pretty simple. Okay, not simple. It's just a lot of mess. It's going to take some time, but just be patient with it. So I'm going to show you this again. I'm just top that off, screw that in, and it's just super messy. And it is a mess. And you push it in to top off the shock grease. But there we go. Then you just go ahead and so you just top out the shock fluid. Make sure that's all wiped down. Then you grab your O-ring. Make sure that O-ring is sealed with green slime. Push that in. Then we grab our locking screw and we screw this in. So next, just make sure that you don't thread this in too tightly. You don't want to bust up the O-ring. And we just wipe everything down, pump the shock a few times, make sure that it's working okay. You know, there's going to be bubbles inside there, but they'll just settle and dissipate through time. And that is looking pretty good. I'm just going to just pump this a few times, make sure that we're getting some nice action on here. And there are actually like shock measuring tools that you could actually use to measure. That's, you know, once again, it's just some more tools to pick up. I'm just pushing this all the way half through, then I'm just topping it off. So when I filled up the fluid, I filled it up halfway through, let it sit for a little while, then I just push the shock up and push it back down to make sure that everything's working okay. And then when you top it off with shock fluid, you just give it some time. I like to top the cap with shock fluid again, and you just twist it in. And ideally you would just let this sit for like a little while. I'm just going to go ahead and clean this out, and then check that out. I'm just going to slowly push that up and then top off the shock fluid. And you would actually want to push that much slower than I did. I'm going too fast. There we go. And that is topped off. Then we just get the O-ring cap threaded in with some green slime. Push that in into the, and admittedly that's kind of hard to push in because we've been pushing out shock fluid through there. Then we just go ahead and thread in the cap and just clean everything up. And we just pump a few times to make sure that we get some nice action in there. And that is looking pretty good. Everything's a little messy, but just get that cleaned out. Alright, so now we'll just thread in the top gear here. Not gear, the shock collar, the threaded collar there. So we'll thread that in, and we'll lock our spring in there. So I'm just making sure that I could actually move that thread collar, and then we'll get our spring, push down, and then we'll put in the spring cup to keep that spring in place. So we'll just push that in so that the spring would actually retain. And after that, that is pretty much done. We have our spring, and this is how you build out shocks. Thanks for watching.